Should your top priority in a relationship be making your husband feel like a hero? Well, that's what some so called relationship experts say. But today I want to talk about what that really means and who it actually benefits. Let's get into it. I'm Leah Carey, relationship and intimacy coach, and today we're unpacking the kind of relationship advice that might sound wise until you realize it's just repackaging the same old bullshit that keeps women small. Dr. Juli Slattery is a clinical psychologist who spent years with the right-wing fundamentalist group Focus on the Family. Now she runs her own ministry called Authentic Intimacy, where she promotes what she calls God's design for sexuality. At first glance, her advice might seem reasonable, even insightful. But if you grew up in purity culture or any high control environment where you were taught to see yourself only in service to someone else, you might begin to see the lie underneath her message. Because when men are told that it is their natural place to be a hero, women are being told they're just supporting characters in their own marriages.
I think also we've seen a lot of change just in the empowerment of women, and that's been a very, very good thing in many spheres. But I think it's also made intimacy in marriage more confusing. As women are getting a voice and getting stronger, I think a lot of times we're seeing men kind of get in the shadows now of
right. We pull back.
Yeah, where's our voice?
All right, so let's talk about what's really being said here. At first glance, again, maybe some people think this sounds reasonable. The idea being that we want men and women to both have an equal voice in relationship. And so as women gain a greater voice, then men's voices are receding, and therefore there's an imbalance against men. But if you dig a little deeper, this is really just another step in the long history of purity culture messaging that subtly and not so subtly reinforces traditional gender roles. The church has been intentionally quieting women's voices for centuries. Women have been told for generations that their highest calling was to be helpmates, supporting men's leadership, not seeking their own fulfillment. And this wasn't just cultural, it was literally baked into the religious teachings. Women were not supposed to have opinions of their own. If they did, then they should share them in some way that made the man not feel too reliant on the woman's opinion and didn't make them too forcefully, because ultimately the man is the head of the family, and therefore it was perfectly okay for him to dismiss her opinions and call her emotional or irrational. As far as sex, women were either ignored completely or they were framed as dangerous temptations. Look at the apple and the snake in the garden. Literally, a woman's desire for something led to the downfall of all of humanity. Pretty dangerous if you're thinking of this as a Christian. So the result of that is that a woman's role in marriage was to submit. Literally, they use the word submit frequently. Serve her husband, take care of the children. In some cases, women even talk about her job being not just to serve her husband, but to serve her children and make sure that her husband feels strong and respected. Okay, so we're coming to a point where women are maybe gaining a little bit more authority in culture and are gaining a little more autonomy. And so now up comes Juli Slattery saying that, oh, no, be careful, because women's empowerment has made marriage confusing. Which begs the question, confusing for who? So just this morning, I was listening to Dr. Kirk Honda, the Psychology in Seattle YouTube channel, and he made a really interesting point that I think is relevant here.
Typical argument that I'm trying to get across to them is like, taking up space in a room or in a relationship or getting to know yourself and letting that actually sneak out in a relationship, revealing that in a trustworthy relationship is not you being a jerk face. It's not you being mean. It's not you taking up 100% of the space. You're only taking up 15% of the space, but it feels like you're taking up 100% because when you were a kid, you weren't allowed to take up 1% of the space. So it feels like a big, because it is a big difference, but you've got a long way to go before you're 50%. And I'll tell clients this, that in my experience, even if you were completely on board and you didn't have all those barriers, and we worked on this and worked on this and worked on this, the most you could achieve would be a 40% in the roomness compared to other people, particularly people that tend to be comfortable taking up a lot of space. And these people tend to match up with people that love to take up a lot of space. In fact, for them to take up 50%, it feels like they're only getting like 30%, depending.
So the issue here has never been about whether men and women are equal. It's about whether men feel like they're getting enough space. And as soon as a woman's desire to take up space encroaches even a tiny little bit on what a man has come to assume and expect to be his space, is going to cause a problem. And so let's be clear. If men are retreating into the shadows because women now have a voice, what does that tell us about how they were showing up before? And what does it tell us about where the women have been? If we're imagining that this is a zero-sum game where there's sun and there are shadows, then by definition, if the men are now retreating into the shadows, it means they were in the sun and the women were in the shadows. And for some reason, nobody thinks that that was a problem. So were men only comfortable in relationships where their authority was never questioned? And if a man's voice in his marriage relies on a woman staying silent, was that ever really a mutual relationship or mutual intimacy? Equality is not confusing. It's just inconvenient for men who have come to expect that power imbalance is the way that it's supposed to be. Equality feels like oppression when you're so used to being in charge that you feel like that's your natural place. But men, specifically white men, have reinforced that their place is at the top of the pecking order by refusing a woman a voice, a vote, or a sense of self outside of what she can do to support a man. So here's the real issue. Messages like this reinforce the idea that for men to feel strong, women must stay small. But healthy relationships aren't about one person being large and the other person supporting them from underneath. They're about mutual respect, emotional depth, and actual partnership, where some days the scale is 40-60 with this person supporting the other one, and the next day it's 60-40 with this person supporting their partner. All right, let's get back into Dr. Slattery's brilliance.
One way I like to think of it is you really don't know if you love your spouse until you don't feel in love anymore.
There is a fine line here between some relatively decent advice and some incredibly harmful advice. The idea that you don't know if you love someone until you feel like you don't love them anymore verges right up onto the idea that I espouse that you should not make any commitments. Don't move in with somebody. Don't get married. Don't make huge life decisions with somebody until you've had a really big fight, a really significant conflict that the two of you have had to work through and really negotiate and come to understanding together, that you've had to forgive, that you've had to make repair with each other. You need to know that your partner can fight fair, is capable of listening and understanding, and that the two of you together are able to do successful repair. Without those things, a long-term relationship can't be particularly healthy. And it's a really bad sign if you never fight at all. If you're not fighting, it means somebody is not telling the truth. Just point blank, period. So I would say you really need to have a significant conflict before you make any type of commitment to somebody, because otherwise you don't know what you're walking into. People have very different fighting styles. People have very different ethics around what is okay in fights and what is not. And some people simply don't know how to listen or do repair. That is very different than saying you're going to know you love your spouse once you don't love them anymore. Now, I think what she's trying to get to here is that love is a verb and you have to choose to love the person. And so when you have some conflict and you feel like, oh, I don't have that loving feeling, that I have to choose to do the love actions, all of which has its place. But it also leads us directly into this idea from purity culture that love is sacrifice. And specifically, that the woman has to do the sacrificing in order to stay in this relationship that is ultimately not serving her, that it's okay if she's miserable. All relationships require work. Of course they do. But this messaging actively encourages women to stay in unhappy, even abusive, and harmful marriages. Sure, love is work. Of course it is. But it should not be the kind of work that involves you feeling shut down, taken advantage of by your partner, feeling disconnected from your partner. Those are signs that something is not okay. And that's why I talk so much about relationship agreements, because they're a place where couples can have conversation about what their needs and boundaries are, what their expectations are, in order to feel connected and desired and like a fulfilling part of an equal partnership, as opposed to feeling disconnected and just kind of there for the other person's use. Love is not about proving devotion through suffering. It's about both people feeling valued, feeling supported, not just one being supported by the other, but both being supported by each other. So let's not push through unhappiness and pretend that, oh, this is me discovering that my relationship is actually a good, healthy one. Let's get clear. Your needs are not secondary, regardless of your gender.
That guide,
Uh-huh.
yeah, men can be dumb sometimes, and we can do things that turn us into spiritual dead ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
But our wives are to help us, and they have a keen insight, typically,
Yeah.
to point us in a better direction. But we don't always
Amen.
listen.
Yeah.
And that's because there is probably a better way to offer some help to your
Well, that's
husband,
Oh,
true.
right?
sure. There's definitely a better way that a woman should be speaking to her husband so that he can accept her help because he is too fragile to hear it any other way. So, what we're hearing here is a very common idea that has, I think, been created to help men to kind of get off the hook for everything they don't want to do, but still have authority over all the things they do want to do. And that's learned incompetence, where men are expected to be bad at emotional labor. They are expected to be bad at domestic tasks. And therefore, women pick up all of the slack. Learned incompetence is this idea that if I just don't learn how to do something, then I'll never be asked to do it. If I'm washing the dishes and I break a couple of them, then I will never have to do the dishes again because my wife will know that I'm bad at it. I don't know how to do it. And so, therefore, I shouldn't ever have to touch it again. Now, that's a sort of cliche way to think about learned incompetence, where people joke about, oh, I don't ever want to have to vacuum again, so I'm going to do it as badly as possible. But there are much more serious ways that this shows up, including men's capacity to emotionally show up for their partner. We have built up this mythology in this culture that men are bad at emotions. But is that true? When it comes down to it, absolutely not. There are some men who have chosen to be so bad at it that they are never asked to do it again. But when push comes to shove, most men will show up emotionally to some degree that is greater than their day to day. When somebody dies, when a child is sick in the hospital, men will show up. They have the capacity, they have the skill, but they choose not to use it because we have, as a culture, taught them that being emotional is not a man's job. That is women's work. So we train men to be less emotional, to only really express anger and joy. Anything else, any of those complicated other emotions, I'm just not going to feel them until they become so strong that I can turn them into anger. And then that feels safe because men are allowed to be angry. We have trained them out of feeling and experiencing all of those other emotions so that then they pass on to the next generation. Oh, this is not a thing that you're supposed to have to do. And we have generation after generation after generation of learned incompetence around anything to do with home, taking care emotionally of our people, of anything that has to do with sort of that emotional nurturing realm. But somehow at the same time, these men are still supposed to be so smart and so capable and so skilled that they are the unquestioned leaders of the house, of the family, of the finances, of everything. This is the origin, I would suggest, of the mental load. When women talk about why am I carrying so much of the emotional load, this is why. Because men have been trained to be incompetent at everything at home. So he's helpless. Why would we even ask him to take any initiative?
Yes!
Wait, honey, where's the Halloween candy?
Huh?
Honey, I called you this morning. I asked you to get Halloween candy.
Honey, one call puts it on the radar. 2 calls makes it sink in.
Okay. For the fairy princess, we have some meatloaf and some 3 bean salad for the rabbit. And for the mummy, spicy gazpacho. Okay, happy Halloween. Okay, bye-bye.
Well, part of what I think women need to understand is that men have a different relationship with competence than women do. Like the heart of a man is always wrestling with this question, am I good enough?
Yep.
Am I going to fail? Am I going to be found out as an imposter? Do I do enough as a husband, as a boss in my work? They're always afraid of I might fail. I might try something.
It's so true.
So I think understanding that need for respect in marriage is a woman saying to her husband consistently, I know the worst about you, but I believe in you. And that's why I named the book Finding the Hero in Your Husband, because at some level, every guy is waking up really asking the question, am I her hero?
This idea that men are constantly afraid of failing and they're waking up every day saying, am I her hero? It really infantilizes men. It says that they need constant reassurance in order to just function, which ironically is something that men complain about with women, that women need constant reassurance that she's pretty, that she's thin, that she's a good mother. Why does she need such constant reassurance? I'm so tired of telling her all of the time. When in fact, here we're being told that men need constant reassurance that they are the hero. And women are being told that their main job in life is to make sure that their man feels strong and capable. And what is she not doing while she's paying attention to whether her man is strong and capable? She's not focusing on her own needs in the relationship. She's not thinking, am I being fulfilled in the ways that I need in order to show up as a full and healthy and functional person? If a relationship is requiring one person to constantly shrink themselves, to constantly move themselves into the shadow in order for the other person to feel worthy, for them to feel big enough and strong enough, is that really a healthy situation? Is it really a healthy relationship? I don't think so. And so the true partnership, the solution, if you will, to all of this is that all people, men, women, every other gender, all people need to feel valued, cherished, and supported. All people also need to be able to give that value and cherishing and support to others. No one person should ever be the sole provider of another person's emotional needs or any other needs, but no person should ever rely on somebody else to be the provider of all of those needs. Healthy relationships involve mutual support, communication, shared responsibility. They do not involve one person leading while the other person follows and supports from below. So, if you have grown up listening to this type of messaging, or if you grew up in a very secular world, but you've noticed this messaging creeping into everyday life, please know you're not alone and it is okay for you to have needs. I'm curious, have you ever been told that it's your job to make your husband, your dad, your boss, even another woman feel like the hero? And what did that look like in your experience? If you want to learn how to have real conversations about needs and boundaries, of course, check out the relationship agreements class, what they are, why you need them. Information is in the description. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, and remember, you are worthy of love. And I'm going to help you get there, one conversation at a time.